Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Good morning, Katie, is probably the best way to start.
Hey, Bruce. Good evening to you. How are you?
I'm very well. I was just saying earlier on, we've got some sunshine here in Scotland for the first time well, no, we've had not a bad summer, but we've got some sunshine today, which is great.
So is it mostly overcast there, like often?
Not mostly. I mean, we get a little bit of sun. When the sun comes out, everyone puts on the shorts and goes to the beach and
Nice.
with our wetsuits on and everything else and try and get in the water.
Yeah.
And yourself? How's the...
Yeah, it's we've had a really foggy summer where I am in Central California. Usually it burns off in the afternoon, but this summer it's just been kind of relentless. But I think our time, September, October, is kind of our summer. So it's starting to be warmer and nicer right now.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, anyone that's we've got a couple of people here already. This is our monthly Facebook Live. I keep threatening every month we will turn it into a podcast at some stage when I can find out how to work it or get some young person to do it for me.
Yeah, those young people, they know.
Yeah, but we were just having a chat earlier on. We're just going to chat through as we flow tonight. But I was going to start off just with just the question. I've had a few people ask. I'm starting to realize a lot of people that we're speaking to, until they understand the depth of how the Sinclair Method works, they still look at it as a conventional program until they know how it works. And I'm realizing now that a lot of people sort of say, when we say we've got a 78% success rate, I'm finding what I'm trying to say is that I'd like to just go over a little bit tonight about why is the Sinclair Method different to other models? Why is it different, and why, as a result of that, why is it so successful? 'Cause I know that you work with clients in the States, and have you had any people coming back to you and just asking, okay, the difference between sort of other programs that they've tried and the Sinclair Method, or why is the Sinclair Method so different?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you asked that because I'm actually rereading The Cure for Alcoholism by Dr. Roy Escapa. I read it when I was on the Sinclair Method 4 years ago, but I'm just now rereading it again. And I think the two fundamental ways that it's different in the research that Dr. David Sinclair did was, one, he discovered the alcohol deprivation effect, which explains why the abstinence-only approach doesn't work for the vast majority of people, because when you're dependent on alcohol on a neurological level and you remove it out, all of a sudden you become deprived of it, whether you're aware of that's what's happening or not. And so that deprivation causes people to become more interested in it. Their motivation for it increases, meaning their craving for it increases. And as you know, that's what drives the relapse so often. And so his discovery of the alcohol deprivation effect was so pivotal to how we treat alcohol now, because it allowed him to then discover the Sinclair Method, which is a way to unlearn the behavior of alcohol addiction and gradually get it out of your life without needing to go through that deprivation effect. Because I'm sure, you worked in the rehab industry for years, and I'm sure you saw people relapsing over and over again. And I think with David Sinclair's discovery, it's that alcohol deprivation effect. And so the Sinclair Method totally takes that out and gets rid of that craving. And so if you don't desire something anymore, it's really easy to let it go or just have it, here and there and with control. I was just reading that in like the first few chapters of the book, and I'm like, oh yes, this is just so scientifically, accurate and proven and tested and all of that, and discovered. Alcohol deprivation was discovered in 1968. And so we've known it for that long, and yet we still treating alcohol in a way that's causing people to experience alcohol deprivation effect. What do you say?
I think that's absolutely bang on, because it was, again, I was speaking to someone this morning, and we were talking about the difference between abstinent-based programs and the Sinclair Method. And the number one thing that I learned from the rehabs, and we connected with the rehabs with all the peer support groups. And then whilst the guys were in rehab with us, they did okay because it was a controlled environment. But then guaranteed down the track with 95% of people that left at some point within the next, quite often it was within the first week or two, but within the next 6 to 12 months, the relapse rates were so high. And I always remember thinking, why is this happening? There must be a better option. There must be a better option to this. And I thought, has no one ever studied it or looked at it? And I thought, we can't be in a position where we don't know what to do with this. And it can't have, there must be some scientific evidence to show what's happening.
Yeah.
And that, what you were saying, the deprivation effect was, guys were coming into rehab, and we always used to think and were taught that it was a moral or a situational reason that would happen that would create someone to then have that first drink that would then drive them back to drinking again. But then what I learned through the Sinclair method, through the deprivation effect, which you were talking about, was that when someone stops in an abstinent-based program, the craving builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and 90% of the people who stop cannot fight it. They literally cannot fight it. And at some point in life, a wedding, a fallout, a divorce, a positive event, something is just going to create them to have one drink, and bang, it's gone again. Yeah. So if you, when I saw the 78%, I just did not believe it. I thought there is no way you can have a program that has a 78% success rate. Yeah. But then when I started to understand that if you take away the craving side of it, then the relapse almost disappears. That's what's causing it. So you're absolutely bang on with it.
Well, and in the book too, thanks, I'll take that as a compliment. he addresses the fact of the 78%. The reason why it's only that is because for the people it wasn't effective for in his research, it was people that were not taking the medication or not taking it properly. And so it could be, have a greater success for more people. But of course, there are a percentage of people that find out about this method and do really well with it. And for one reason or another, they stop taking the medication. I see that all the time. And so I think there's a lot of contributing factors that can drive someone to continue to drink without naltrexone, even though they know this is an effective treatment and it will cure them. The habit piece, the coping piece, all of that. But yeah, he was quite a revolutionary in his research, because in the book it's talking too about he was kind of getting resistance toward him doing this discovery. He kind of took rats on his own and went into the basement and did this research on his own. And the scientist he was working with didn't really care about or believe in what he was doing. And so it was his curious mind that led him to see that, when these rats that are used to drinking are deprived of alcohol and then reintroduced, they're going to binge on it at a rate up to 15 times more than they were drinking before. So this is just, for me, it answers so many questions of why can I go 6 months? But then when I start, it's I have no control again, or things like that, drinking patterns before TSM. So grateful to him for this research. I really am.
I think what I was thinking about today was the danger, and I'm guessing that you have it as well, is that when we work with it all the time, and the biggest danger with it now is that it becomes normal for us. It just becomes a normal process. And then I have to stop myself sometimes and think back to when I was working with abstinent programs. And there's nothing wrong. Again, I know you for long enough. We support any abstinent program that works for an individual. Yeah. If it works for someone, just absolutely go for it. But the success rate is, I spoke to someone in our local medical, it's called the NHS in this country recently, in their programs, and they are recording a 4 to 6% success rate. And it's just, and then when you come along with a 78%, I understand that people won't believe it, they don't accept it, they don't understand it, but the truth is it's killing people. And it's at worst, at best, it's destroying individuals and families. And I'm getting to the point in Scotland or the UK where we have to do something different in this country. The success I'm seeing, we've done a 2-year pilot project, and the success we're seeing is miles and miles and miles ahead of any other program around today. And that's not to knock the other programs, but it's just, you've got the same frustration. I know. It's how do we get that message out there?
Yeah. Well,
I'm
there is
guessing
the notion. Oh, what's that?
it's the same in the States. I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Sorry, just one thing quickly. If anyone's watching, we've got quite a few people on now. If you've got any questions at all, just stick it in the comments. We would love to answer any questions as it comes along. So.
Yeah, or if there's topics you want us to explore, you can put that in there as well.
But I'm guessing it's the same in the States as well, is it?
Yeah, it is. And every day people are asking how they can spread the word. And I think that is how we're doing it, is this grassroots movement. You know, there are some more media publications that are talking about naltrexone. What's frustrating for me is they're not talking about the Sinclair method. They're talking about naltrexone, which is great. That's a first step. But when I'm sure you encounter people all the time that they get given naltrexone to take every day with abstinence, and they throw the pill bottle away because they're like, this doesn't work, because it doesn't work for most people, from what I've seen. So yeah, there is the notion of the tipping point. And, I think I read somewhere that can happen with just a 10% buy-in from people on something. And so the momentum continues to build with the work Claudia and C3 are doing, and the work you're doing, and that I'm doing, and the community is doing, by talking to their doctor about it, by telling their friend about it. Yeah, it's frustrating that it's so effective, and it's, every day I talk to people and they just stumbled upon it by accident. Like nobody has learned about it through any means that you would think, like their doctor. It's like, or they get given the medication again to take it with abstinence, because it's FDA approved for treatment of alcohol, but it's not prescribed in the right way following the Sinclair method. It's prescribed with abstinence. Hey, Steve.
And just in case, good old Steve. No, it's okay. Just in case anyone is here that has never heard of the Sinclair method, the simple way to describe it is that there are two options now available for people who are struggling with alcohol use disorder or alcohol dependency. One is abstinence, where someone has been drinking to a level of dependency and they just stop drinking, and then learn coping mechanisms to stay stopped, where they'll go to peer support groups and things like that. The other option is a medication-based, clinically trialed, 25, 30-year clinical trials and research done by Dr. Sinclair with a medication called naltrexone. When people become dependent on alcohol, it's not necessarily the alcohol they're dependent on, it's the release of the endorphins that are released as a result of drinking. And there is too much endorphin being released, and because of that high level of endorphin, over a period of time, the brain becomes dependent on that substance, on the endorphin. So the minute you take that endorphin away from the brain that it's been used to for ages and ages and ages, the brain goes into craving mode, and the alcohol deprivation effect that Katie was talking about then builds and it becomes a real struggle. The reason the Sinclair method is so different is we use a medication called naltrexone, which sits on the receptor. It reduces the flow of the endorphins down to a level where people don't go into that, I need more, I need more, I need more, I need more, and they can bring it down to a level where they can control it. And I think Dr. Sinclair said it, Katie said, it rewires the brain. It rewires the neurological pathways in the brain, reverting the brain back to pre-addictive days. So it is very, very possible with medication to reverse the process of addiction in the brain and reverse things back to a normal. That's why people can still drink. I didn't believe it in the first days, and Katie's seen it happen again and again. I'm just watching client after client after client. And just in case there'll be people saying, well, you can't just take a medication. There is, Katie does a lot of support work in the States with clients. So we very, very highly recommend, and we know the success rate goes much, much higher if people take the medication that deals with the endorphins. And then what we do in a support side of things is we work with the clients on the habits, the emotional, the psychological side of the things, which still needs to be worked on.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well said, Bruce. Very well said. Yeah, I think that, and I know Hannah has a question in the chat, which we can answer for sure. And we talk about the habit piece a lot, but I think that's the thing that hangs people up so often is once the craving is quelled and like they're not really desiring alcohol as much as they used to. The habit is the thing for people to work on next. And I think that that can be the biggest challenge for people. And I see it in the groups all the time where people will be well aware that they're drinking every night out of habit or out of a means to cope with stress or something like that. They recognize naltrexone is working, but they are still playing out their habit or their coping piece. So that phase of TSM can be challenging. And if someone isn't being supported within a community or within their spouse or working one-on-one, whatever support works for a person, maybe plugging into a church or a spiritual group or taking up a sport or something, if they're not doing something else differently, then it can be really easy to just get in the habit of popping naltrexone before your evening drinking ritual. And sometimes, people need to do that many times and have those repeated extinction sessions in those settings to get motivated to move to the next stage. But I know you see it too, Bruce, that habit or the coping piece, it caught me by surprise when I was on TSM. I thought I was just drinking for fun. I didn't realize it was a habit. And looking back, of course it was. I was drinking every single day of the week for many, many years. But I was like, oh, I have to change the habit. Like, I don't really want it, but here I am drinking on Friday night. Why am I doing that? And so it was a process of undoing that habit and trying different things. But yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And then, so Hannah was saying, I would love to hear about the redosing issue and the exact dosage issue. Seems to be popping up a fair amount. I would love to hear about the redosing issue.
Yeah.
Do you want to go on that one first and then?
Sure. Yeah. So Hannah, I know you and I have talked about this a few times, and Hannah is such a gem. She's such a great support in the TSM community. So what I've understood, and of course this is not medical advice, but the half-life of naltrexone can vary between 4 to 13 hours. That's what the data has shown. And so that means that between 4 hours and up to 13 hours, a person has metabolized it by 50%. And so they essentially have 25 milligrams in their bloodstream. So the therapeutic dose of naltrexone is 50 milligrams. And so when they reach that half-life, whether, again, it's very individualized because people are metabolizing it at different rates and absorbing it at different rates. So whether it's 14 hours or up to 13 hours, for some people, they will have less of the naltrexone in their system. And so the notion of a redose is that if someone's drinking beyond a certain amount of time after they've taken it, they'll want to take a second dose of the medication so that they are protected. And what we've seen doctors do in the TSM community is a 6 to 8 hour window. So if they took naltrexone at noon and they're still drinking at 6 that night, their doctor may advise them to take a second dose, wait another hour, and then continue with the drinking. So that 6 to 8 hour window, I think, is just kind of like the average for what we see in the half-life being 4 to 13 hours. But for most people, a redose, I always hear it's really helpful for people when I ask people about it who are redosing. But the trick is that it varies by the individual. Some people swear by a 4 hour redose, some people 6, some people 8, some people feel like they're covered for 12. So it's really up to the individual. I know I've heard Claudia say when she first learned about it that Dr. Sinclair told her she was covered, I think, for, what was it, 12 hours, 24 hours? Don't quote me on that, but it was something like that. So I think as people practice this and work with a knowledgeable doctor, they can, refine it more to understand what works for them. But in general, I think redosing is a best practice. But because we're metabolizing it at different rates, it varies by the individual. What have you seen on that side, Bruce?
I agree 100% with that, what you're saying. The only thing that I will do with clients I'm working with is I've just got to be very, very careful. The client that I'm working with is whether they are just taking, they're looking for just the pill to do all the work, is what I'm trying to say. So absolutely redose at the time, what you're saying. But what I'm also trying to do is I'm just also, because I'm working with clients, I'm tracking their week on week. So the first question I would be looking at myself is, am I seeing a change in I ask for drink diaries and things like that. So am I seeing a change in the drink diary and the figures? Or is this individual just getting to the point where, so it's a big subject, but if I always see, I had 2 new clients start last week, and I always see a 30 to 50% drop in the first 2 weeks, 90% of the time. So we normally see that, and then it levels out. And then at that point, I had someone today phone me up there in week 3, very common in week 3. Do I need to redose? Do I need to increase the amount that I'm taking? But I know at that point, that's a normal drop. It then levels out. And then the rest of it is we have to then start working with on the habitual, emotional, psychological side to change habits and change everything else. So I would redose initially, but normally if someone's drinking earlier on in the day, I would make a point of trying to adjust the time that they're starting to drink.
Yeah.
Allow them to redose and do everything at this stage. But then I would say do that, check it with the doctor. We would check with our doctor here. But then I would then go back to the main focus being, okay, we need to change the habit. Because I've seen so many people in the past with the Sinclair method is they get hold of the medication and then they think the pill's going to do everything. And it does. The pill does everything for the neurological side or the receptor side, but then we need to still work on the habitual side. So yeah, absolutely. But if someone's been redosing for the last 6 months and there's been no change, then we need to kind of look at the habitual side.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point you make, where people, if they're relying only on the medication and thinking that increasing their dose will fix the plateau they've hit, or it's not going to fix the habitual piece of it. We could take a diet pill, but we could still binge eat on chips. If we're not changing our behaviors, then the pill's only going to work so much.
I always use the example. I've got they call it, well, they've changed the name of it again. Something called petit mal, which is mild epilepsy. So if the medication I was taking was not controlling my seizure in most things, or if your insulin's not controlling your diabetes, then you would increase the amount of medication you take. So I think that's where that school of thought comes from, because in a lot of situations, it's okay, if it's not doing what it's doing, you need to take more medication. But I think, like you were saying, from the Cure for Alcoholism book from Roy Scarpa, the 25 years of research he did, he found that 50 milligram for the average person was the right amount to take. Now, some people, like you said, because of I can never say the word metabolism. They do need to take a little bit more and everything, but consult your doctor for that one. But with your average person, the 50 milligrams is enough. And then to work on the habits, now after 6 to 12 months, if there's been habitual change and everything else, and it's still being difficult, then I would go back to the doctor and have a look at it. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I know Hannah too mentioned Mark Lewis. I think he wrote, it just came up last night in our TSM call, The Biology of Desire. I haven't read that book. I'm going to get it because people keep telling me about it. Have you read The Biology of Desire, Bruce?
No. Mark Lewis has blown my understanding of this. I think Hannah mentioned this as well before sometime. No, she did. And I went and watched a little bit of it. He had a YouTube video, I think. So it was good. Read it. Hannah says read it. And I'm just going to go back to, again, I won't mention surnames, obviously, because we're a public forum, just in case there's people listening in. But William says, good evening. He's on day 531 of his own recovery from drugs. Very interesting. So first of all, William, well done. We don't know what the situation was, but Sinclair Method at the moment is not used in the drug world, purely because it's a reduction program leading to safe drinking or abstinence. So we have to take the medication, wait an hour, and drink. There needs to be a bit more research, I believe, and there needs to be a bit more governmental discussions over that side of things. So that's the best. Yeah, I'll move on to that one.
Yeah.
And then Nick says, my doctor won't prescribe. I have to go through a drug alcohol recovery place. I say I'm abstinent, but it's the only way I can get the tablets. I'm in Wales, by the way. Started this some years back, and it's my second time going through them, as they only prescribe for 6 months. It's working fantastic for me. do you think it will ever be accepted by the NHS here? My understanding is you do it in Scotland. Yeah, yes, Nick. I'm in Scotland, but I work with clients all over the UK. So. The NHS, Katie, I think you probably know, is the UK Medical National Health Service, they call it. I think it will eventually one day become, the NHS will get hold of it. The NHS is a big machine. It's a huge, huge monster with so many departments, so many decision makers. I think it will be a governmental thing that changes it eventually. The government will get to the point where they realize that this could save them millions, and then they might invest into what needs to be done. So yeah, I think it will come. And is there anything else there? Valium and opiates, fake Valium. Okay, yeah. And that's a hard one to come off. Well done, William. My background was alcohol and drug rehab, so I worked in that area for quite a while. So well done, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, and Hannah's also said there are claims that taking Nal and not drinking confuses the brain, hence the forced drinking idea. Thoughts? Do you want to go on that one?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear what you think as well. So in my personal experience with naltrexone, if I took it and didn't feel like drinking, I would still have a couple sips of alcohol just to have a mini extinction session. To me, that made sense to do because I had the naltrexone in my system, and the fact that I didn't really want to drink and I was kind of forcing myself, you know, it wasn't like that appalling, but I'd be like, I really don't feel like it, but I would have a couple sips anyway. To me, that was kind of grounding in the extinction session, especially because it didn't sound good. And so I would have it and I'd kind of be a little repulsed from it. And that would allow me to have more alcohol-free days on TSM, honestly. So that worked for me on the method. There were a few times where I took it and I didn't drink just because plans changed or the occasion didn't call for it. But to your question, Hannah, about whether it's confusing the brain, in my personal opinion, what I've seen just talking with people over the years is that if they're doing it, you know, once in a while, it's not like a daily thing. I don't see any harm in it. I know Claudia and others have said over and over that if you take it and you don't feel like drinking, you don't need to force yourself to drink. And I think that that's true. Where I see people struggle with naltrexone is if it's taken daily with abstinence and it starts to have side effects or impact their mood. Or, you know, again, it's not in that targeted dose with the alcohol. So I haven't, you know, seen any issues with it either way. In my personal experience, it worked to drink after I took it. What are your thoughts, Bruce?
I think the situation, I actually had the exact conversation with someone today.
Oh, no way. Okay, well, there we go.
And the situation came up because they were fairly new. They were a month into the program. They'd reduced the 30 to 50% initially. But then what happened was they obviously leveled out. And they were trying to get their first alcohol-free day. Now, 1 week they would do it, and next week they wouldn't do it. So when they decided to go for their first alcohol-free day, they weren't confident and convinced that they would do it. So they were sort of saying, well, do I take my pill just in case I can't do it, or don't I? So I said, in that situation, the whole concept of the Sinclair method is that you're clawing back the control of when you drink and how often you drink. So at this stage, you're still in the area where you're having to fight the control of it. So if you have, like you were saying, if you have the odd day when you take the pill and don't drink, it's not going to be a major thing. Like you say, when you're doing it all day, every day, that's a different thing. It's just not going to work. But as the occasional thing, I don't think it's really an issue, because in time, as people go further down and they get more and more alcohol-free days, they'll get more and more control, and that whole thing will just disappear. It just won't be an issue.
Yeah.
I think it's in that beginning middle period where. So yeah, I don't think it's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Unless they're doing it, or the doctor said do it on an abstinent-based process, and Dr. Sinclair proved that didn't work. So.
Yeah.
So. So yeah. So okay. And Steve, taking the medication they're not drinking isn't TSM. Yeah. So yeah. So again, just fire away if anyone's got any questions or anything. If we've missed anything, forgive us. I always say to Katie that I've got a form of dyslexia. And so if we've missed anything, I'm blaming Katie. No. Always take the easy
Whatever
way out.
works.
No, it's not. No, it's not Katie.
I'm curious, Bruce. Can I ask you, in your world, are your patients primarily on, or your clients, I should say, are they primarily on naltrexone or nalmefene or both?
Naltrexone completely.
Naltrexone. Okay.
And the reason we do that is purely just on side effects. The side effects are a little bit more on nalmefene than they are on naltrexone. And again, if someone's just linked to, there are two medications that do the same thing, nulmaphine and naltrexone. They do exactly the same thing. And naltrexone will sometimes, in some clients, will create a little bit of nausea on day 1 and day 2, but it normally settles after that. Now, sometimes it does go on to day 3 or day 4 with clients, but the majority of the time, it's gone after day 1 or day 2. So doctors always advise half a tablet on day 1 and half a tablet on day 2. Nalmefene is used by an organization in England, and it does exactly the same thing. So if it doesn't give them any side effects or bad side effects, then I believe it's just as good. I've never used it. So.
Yeah, I've met very few people on it. One gentleman I knew who was taking it, he did well. He didn't have those side effects, but I know I've heard others that have more serious side effects with it. Yeah, I was just curious.
And William's, this is a very interesting one. William has just asked, what would your advice for someone looking to stop drinking now?
Yeah.
Don't. No. That's going to be really.
No. I mean, in my opinion, if someone wants to stop drinking right now and they're not at risk for withdrawal, for example, I think looking into the more nutrition supplement side of things, there's a gentleman in the States called Fit Recovery. His name's Chris Scott, and he quit drinking through supplements, diet, and exercise. And I know some doctors as well that are well versed in the science behind that. For example, like the omega-3s and high doses of that and other supplements that can help with craving. There's a book, I think it's called The Vitamin Cure for Alcoholism. I have a copy somewhere, but I never tried that stuff for my own drinking, but now how much I know about vitamins and supplements and how when we are drinking heavily, it's totally depleting us of key nutrients and minerals and vitamins. And so if someone doesn't want to do TSM and they are just looking to go cold turkey, if it were me, I would really work on the diet piece and the supplement piece. And oftentimes it's high doses of these supplements. And again, that book, like The Vitamin Cure for Alcoholism, I think the name of it is, that would be what I would do. What would you say about that, Bruce?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of different methods, different ways of doing things. In regards to the Sinclair method, if someone got in touch and said that they wanted to stop drinking on the Sinclair method, the first thing we would do in the UK here is we would do an assessment with the client. We would then get them a medical assessment with our doctor. They would then prescribe naltrexone, and then we run a 6-month support program. So I would then put someone onto a 6-month program, a 1-to-1 program, where we then work with the client over the next 6 months. But it's an alcohol reduction program leading to abstinence or safe drinking, rather than the conventional concept, which is abstinent. You just stop drinking, and then you cope with the craving and everything else and deal with that. Now that works for some people, and again, if that's someone's option, again, it will depend on how much people are drinking, how dependent they are, a whole bunch of different scenarios. But if it's the Sinclair method, then we would definitely advise using the medication. Again, we've got to be very careful how we say this, because there are some people who are coming to us drinking maybe a bottle of wine a day or half a bottle of wine a day. or whatever level, right the way up to a bottle of Jack Daniels, a bottle of vodka a day. Now, the first thing we have to make sure is that person, because it's an alcohol reduction program and you have to keep drinking, if you're drinking a bottle of vodka, we need to make sure that individual is safe, because that volume of vodka every day is, we need to get that down as fairly straightforward as quickly as possible. But we have to do it safely, and we have to do it under a very controlled process. So if I get someone who's drinking more, I would work a lot more closely with them for the first month at least, just to make sure. We don't want them going into withdrawals. We don't want them to go into seizure, all that kind of thing. So So thanks, William.
Yeah.
Am I missing any questions? I know there's stuff coming up.
I just want to say
with mental health?
Even though naltrexone and TSM is an alcohol reduction, just to kind of reiterate your point, like there are plenty of people who go on this method with the end goal of quitting drinking and being sober. And some people get there accidentally, and other people, that's their goal starting out. And so they just gradually reduce to that point, and get there in a matter of, handful of months for most people, or sometimes longer. But yeah, just to kind of hit home on that you don't have to drink on TSM if you don't want to, if your goal is to stop. You just need to give it a little time to work and allow you to reach extinction.
Yeah. And William, wow. Well, that's a hard one. William was asking about, further up, he was asking about how do they cope with the mental health sides of the withdrawals. I'll come on to that other one. Just very quickly from us, William, Katie calls it a comfort blanket. I love it, the expression. The Sinclair Method has because we are an alcohol, one of the hardest parts with abstinent-based programs is that people are drinking for a number of years. The brain is used to getting the amount of endorphins it is, and then it all of a sudden stops. It then goes into craving mode, so it's fighting the craving. It has to go through a detox. It has to fight all that kind of thing. Once it gets through the detox, things settle down. Then people have to deal with everyday life again. Now, some people could have been drinking for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So that's a big, big shock to the system. And then all of a sudden to deal with the emotional upheaval of whatever is a very, very difficult thing. So what I find amazing with the Sinclair Method compared to abstinence is that because it's a reduction program, when I'm speaking to clients, I'm not only putting them through a reduction program, I'm making sure that they're safe as we reduce down. So if someone's going from 100 units and they drop down to 50 units, each week I'm speaking to them, how are you getting on? How are things? And I'm listening for any issues that might arise in regards to psychological or emotional circumstances that start to come up. And the minute that happens, we have, across here in Scotland, we have addiction counsellors, we have trauma counsellors, and we have psychologists as well that we will refer people to. So we are listening and watching very carefully for that as people reduce. However, if it's not serious trauma, sometimes my advice to someone 1 week when they're phoning, when they're dropping, is they can drop too much too quickly because there's too much emotion that comes up. So my advice sometimes, depending on the person's situation, is just hold where we are just now until you get used to the new level of drinking and dealing with life with that level of drink. Once we get used to that, we can drop a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. And Katie perfectly calls it it's a comfort blanket. It's a nice way to drop people back to dealing with life without it. And then the nice thing is once people get to the lower level, I've got to be careful what I say here, but I had a client who lost a family member yesterday, and she was on. She's just a lovely lady, and all of a sudden it's like, what's going to happen, and how am I going to do this? And she'd got quite low down, but as long as she takes the medication, she's not going to spiral out of control again. But she could still have an extra few drinks to deal with the situation. So that's the nice thing with the Sinclair Method. Whereas abstinent-based, if that might be in a position where it pushed someone over the edge to have one drink, and bang, it's 6 months, 12 months of oblivion. I cannot emphasize how good the process is that works, but how comfortable it is. That's a brilliant question, William, because it allows us the space to deal with any mental health issues as we're coming down. So
yeah.
Do you come across that, Katie? Or?
Yeah, I mean, the mental health side of it, obviously I'm not a mental health professional, but I know, like, I've had clients on TSM, a few of them that are bipolar, and it's interesting because their bipolar disorder will reflect in their TSM journey. Well, they'll have 6 months on TSM and be compliant and doing well, engaging in hobbies, not really drinking. And then just one day they'll stop taking the medication and kind of have a whole different experience and binge drink on alcohol. And so in those cases, if they're working with a mental health professional that's, maybe a psychiatrist prescribing them medication for their mental health issue, and then alongside like a TSM coach that can really like refine the day-to-day practice of TSM. But I think if that's a real concern, mental health stuff at a level that's beyond just, day-to-day coping or stresses, I think obviously having a mental health professional coupled with a support system with TSM, because I know for some people it can be really severe, just beyond the basics of what a lot of us struggle with regards to anxiety or depression on a more mild or moderate level. But I think that's a great point, William, that, a lot of people struggle with, and a lot of people, those mental health issues keep them drinking more than they want to, even on TSM. So it's a complex issue. And yeah, really great question.
And something else as well, quickly, was that I have learned that has absolutely blown my mind. And I hope I can explain this properly. In abstinence-based programs, we were always taught that if somebody relapses, they relapse because of a previous issue, whether it's a divorce or a trauma or something. Now, sometimes that is the case. So please, you've got to take this in a kind of a general thing. But what happens a lot of the times is if someone started drinking, I had a client who started drinking 20 years ago because he went through a divorce. Now, this is quite a long, alcohol dependency is a learned behavior. So over a period of years, people drink more and more and more and more. The brain eventually becomes dependent on alcohol and it tips over into dependency. And when it tips over into dependency, the person will continue to drink, not because of the previous trauma. They'll continue to drink because the brain is dependent on alcohol. But what then happens is when they try and stop and they relapse, they don't realize that it's the craving that's causing the issue, that it must be that previous trauma. So they go back again and again and again and again and again to the trauma. Now, please, please, please understand that there is some trauma that does still need dealt with. But in a lot of situations, what I find is that the reason people started drinking 20, 30 years ago, they're not drinking today because of that. They're drinking today because the brain is dependent on alcohol. That's the only reason they're drinking. But because we don't understand that, we have to package it up in some way to say, okay, we're drinking because of a trauma that happened 20, 30 years ago. Now, as people are reducing, we have to separate the two things. That the dependency is one thing, and that's what we deal with. Now, as people are reducing, like William said, we have to make sure that there isn't that past trauma starting to come back up. Now, they are two separate things, very, very separate things. So the dependency is a medical neurological condition. And then we need to deal with that with the naltrexone. And then the other side of it. Now, a lot of people, as they come down, the guy that got divorced 20 years ago, he got remarried, he had 3 kids, he was happy. He didn't have to keep going over and over and over the marriage from 20 years ago. But when he relapsed in abstinence-based programs, they told him he still hasn't dealt with what's happened in the past, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was the craving. But again, there is some not genuine, that's not the right word. There is trauma that still needs dealt with in a lot of situations, like lots of different situations. So sorry, that was
No, that's super interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that before, Bruce. And I think I tried talk therapy, and we all have trauma in our childhood. And I tried that for my drinking many times. And you kind of just like connected the dots for me on why that wasn't effective, because we were revisiting my past traumas. And in some ways I didn't really want to, but that's where the therapy led to, because those were the questions that were asked. And so, Yeah, it's really interesting. But with that said, you're right as well. Like as I reduce the drinking, and I think this happens for a lot of people, it's like these emotions come up that maybe we're not used to feeling, or, you know, we're drinking to cope with a crummy job or something else in our current reality that isn't necessarily the trauma from childhood or many years ago. So yeah, very interesting.
And I was absolutely fascinated with it when I started to realize that on the dependency side that people used to talk to me about craving when they're on the medication. Am I craving, or is it habit? Is it craving, or is it habit? And I suddenly realized that the dependency, I could never understand. People say that alcohol dependency is a learned behavior, but it is a learned behavior. We all have a drink when we're younger. It releases endorphins. Then you go to work, you get stressed, you have another drink. You go to a wedding, you have a drink, and you do that for a number of years. The brain then becomes dependent, but there is a point where it tips into dependency. So when you try Sober October and you can't do it, it's because your brain is dependent. It's not because you're a failure.
Yeah.
So at that point, the brain is now dependent. So the daily drinking from people who are drinking day to day, they might say, oh, I had an argument with someone, or I fell out with someone. But that is just a justification for why they're drinking every day. But it's because the brain is dependent. You try and take it away, they will go into craving that is so hard to beat that it's incredible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like
and
you
William,
said, it's complex.
What's that?
It's complex, though. It has to be taken individually is the key.
Absolutely. And William said that trauma needs sorted also. And I totally agree.
Yep.
And I wonder, because I know he's approaching 2 years sober from his alcohol or drug use. But for me, I couldn't heal with the alcohol. That was how much alcohol I was consuming. And as soon as I started to drink less through TSM, it was like all of these things started to surface that I felt like, okay, I can finally start to work through and heal now, because we're naturally built to be able to heal these things and deal with them and process them. And, you know, I think when I was drinking, I thought my emotions were going to kill me. And so I was like, I got to numb these before they kill me. But you actually learn. And I tell people that I coach, it's like we have a coping muscle that we need to grow, and alcohol has weakened it. And it's kind of like going to the gym. You know, every day that you're coping with something challenging or processing challenging emotions, that ability to cope with things, your muscle grows and grows. And so it becomes easier the more you just practice, you know, not turning to alcohol for those things. But yeah.
And as you always call it, your comfort blanket, you can, if you're drinking 100 units a week and trying to deal with something, then if you drop to 50 units, then you can still initially, whilst you're learning how to deal with it without as much alcohol, and then a little bit less alcohol and a little bit less alcohol, it's easier to do it that way than suddenly just stopping and going, right, okay.
Yeah.
How do I
pull the rug out from under me?
Yeah.
Right. Karen put in here, because someone asked about how to quit immediately, and Karen brought up that there are other medications like Topromax, acamprosate, and baclofen that can help with cravings for immediate abstinence as well. I neglected to mention that, so thank you, Karen.
And okay, I know there's some at the bottom here. I'm just trying to. If the intent is not to drink, then the intent is to drink. Simple as that. Nick has said, highly recommend trying TSM. At my lowest, I was hiding bottles of vodka and wine everywhere and drinking every day. I had more or less stopped drinking altogether and stopped doing TSM. Then lockdown came along and I relapsed. So did you notice much of a change during lockdown for people you were working with?
Yeah, for some people I did, like folks who I knew were doing really well. I happened to just connect with them in lockdown, and they were, not everyone, obviously, but some were not complying and their drinking had gone back up. And I think that just shows, like, you know, alcohol is such a quick and easy coping tool for people. And if we're not actively developing other strategies to cope with, we can fall back on alcohol really easily. And if they have TSM and if they're drinking too much here and there, like, okay, at least they're complying with TSM. But I think that when those type of instances occur and people skip taking now, or, you know, they're drinking more, I think there's more work to be done on the coping side of it. Yeah.
And then, sorry, Donna, I missed Donna's list, but quite a long. Forgive me, I'm dyslexic, so I'm not going to read it all out because I'll be here half the night trying to read it. But she's basically talking about becoming habitual. Things becoming habitual. The more you do it, the more habitual it becomes. I heard something absolutely fascinating in the early days, was that when someone becomes dependent on any substance, whether it's drink or drugs, there are two sides to the whole process. One side is the craving and the addiction side, which is what's happening in the brain, and that creates a physical requirement for the substance, alcohol or drugs. The other side is the habit, which includes emotions, psychological, circumstance, situations, all that kind of stuff. They're two very separate things. Now, the reason they get very, very mixed up in abstinence-based programs. So what happens is people they're fighting the craving, and then they're fighting the habit, they're fighting the craving, they're fighting the emotions, they're fighting, and it all becomes a big mess. But what the Sinclair Method does is it clearly separates it. So what I've learned is once we get the craving and the addictive side that's happening in the brain under control with the medication, everything else is so much easier to deal with.
Yeah.
All the work that the peer support groups, the rehab centers, if they could just introduce naltrexone, their success would go through the roof, literally through the roof, because the work they do on the habitual, emotional, psychological side is amazing.
Wow.
Is amazing. They just don't deal with the neurological medical situation. So please,
I know.
Study the science, please.
For me, the craving could never allow me to do that deep work that I was able to do once I was on TSM for a few months, and my mind was more clear, and I wasn't entirely focused on alcohol all day, every day, whether or not I was drinking. You know, I was always just fighting that craving. And so when I started on TSM and got more mind space, I was like, oh, I have space in me now to process this emotion or talk to the therapist about this, or really like allow things to heal. Whereas before it was just like, I felt like battling the craving was always this like barrier to real healing. So yeah, I agree. The combo of those two would be the ideal scenario.
People used to say I had one client that always used to say to me, he said, when I was sitting in meetings every single week, he said the craving was so strong that all I heard when I went to the meetings was blah, 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 blah. Because all he was thinking about was what time is this finishing? When can I get out for a drink? Or he was just like, fight, 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 fight.
Yep, exactly.
And it's
if I was at a party that didn't have alcohol, I would be angry. I'd be like, why isn't there alcohol here? When can I leave? Like, honestly. And I didn't realize how much I was absorbed in it at the time. But now looking back, it's crazy.
Yeah. So, yeah. And next thing, a relative, I won't say too much, a relative is my biggest trigger. And TSM has even helped me with that. My after-team carer tells me I am the only one in our area on naltrexone. Wow. It is, Nick. It's so that half the reason we do this is we are doing everything we can in our power. We're just a little grassroots thing. But I've got a meeting with someone in the Scottish government next week. I'm not holding any hope, but we are trying to get as much discussion and things going as possible, and as I'm sure Katie is in the States, and C3 Foundation with Claudia. There's an amazing lady who's on the chat here called Karen, who's also doing a stack of work in the States. So yes, we're trying. But yeah, just keep going with it. With triggers as well, one very quick tip is if you're on naltrexone and you're compliant, which I'm sure you are, and keep a diary each week, and then if you notice that occasionally it spikes up a little bit because you've had a few extra drinks, just become aware of what's causing that spike. Now, if it's an argument with a family member, then, and you just for example, say you have an argument with a family member, you go away and you have an extra bottle of wine that night, take a note of it, record it, become aware of it. So the next time you have that argument, allow yourself, say, listen, I'll have 3/4 of a bottle of wine. I'll allow myself 3/4 of a bottle of wine. I'll go for a walk first. I'll try and deal with it in a different way, but then I'll still allow myself 3/4 of a bottle of wine. Yeah. And then the next time it happens, or the next 3 or 4 times later, have half a bottle and then a quarter bottle. So what you're doing is you're learning to deal with that situation with a little less and a little less and a little less. If you try and do it straight away with nothing, then it's just too big a turmoil. It's quite an emotionally charged situation.
Yeah.
So just do it stage by stage, little change over a longer period alongside the medication, and it will work.
Yeah,
it will work. So,
and Hannah, I don't know why you're
wisdom?
not seeing any other. Sorry, Hannah just mentioned she's not seeing all of the chats in here, which I'm seeing they're all on Facebook. So I'm not sure why you wouldn't be seeing them.
I don't know. We'll have a look at that for the next one. So, C3 Foundation helped me loads. Amazing group. Yeah. So Claudia Christian, I always give a shout out to Claudia. She is, I know Katie knows Claudia as well. She just does an amazing job. If anyone's on YouTube, there are 2 very, very good YouTube channels for Naltrexone or the Sinclair Method. One is Claudia's, anything with Claudia's name on it, and anything, she won't like me saying this, but anything with Katie Lain's name on it is also incredible. Katie, you videoed a lot of your journey on the Sinclair Method, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And just kind of videos about tips and lots of interviews from others as well who have had success with the method, various experiences, which I love telling people's stories because, you know, everyone's TSM experience looks different. So it's, I just posted a video with a woman who she was on the method for a year or a little more before she even knew if it was working. She was still drinking a ton, and then things just started to take a turn. But, you know, some people hit extinction in 3 months and other people it takes much longer. So I love to tell those diverse stories so people don't feel like they're, you know, they're the one it's not working for, or they're the one that, you know, it's not working fast enough for. So yeah, if you search Sinclair Method or Naltrexone on YouTube, you'll find a lot of different content and materials. There's great info out there.
And Katie's very humble, and Katie's videos are very, very, very good.
Thanks,
a lot of the stuff but no, they are. I mean, it's a lot of the stuff I learned in my early days came from Katie's videos. So yeah, go away and have a look. Embodydaily.com is Katie's. Do you want to say something about what you do in the States?
Yeah, so
Embody Daily.
Yeah, I on the website on embodydaily.com, you can find resources like blogs. There's a link to the free TSM support groups that happen every day. We have host volunteers, people who've done TSM themselves or are on it themselves. So these meetups happen 7 days a week through Zoom. Just a great peer support group for anyone who's on TSM or wants to know more about it. You can also book coaching sessions with me on there, and just read more about the Sinclair Method and find resources as well. Like I have a resources page that links to the various Facebook groups and C3 Foundation and other things like that. So yeah, since I've started TSM, I've just been super passionate about spreading the word because it was the answer I'd been looking for many years. And it finally, you know, some doctors hesitate to call it a cure, but I really feel cured of my alcohol problems. Like it's been 3 years since I drank and I don't even think about it. I'm not tempted. I don't miss it. I'm not triggered. It's just a miracle. And this is someone, you know, I was drinking a bottle of wine a night plus just binge drinking all weekend. And I was in that cycle for almost a decade. So yeah, it was the answer to my prayers, honestly. So that's why I work in this field now, because many people are struggling just like I was. And, you know, we don't have to go at it alone or try methods that are just going to fail us, like, you know, the abstinence-based approaches do for many people. So, yeah.
I think the Sinclair Method turns everything upside down. So the abstinence-based programs will work for a small amount of people. And for those people, we have to emphasize is absolutely amazing. Stick at it, keep going at it. Absolutely brilliant. But what the Sinclair Method has done, where's my camera? There it is literally turned everything back to front. Yeah. Katie's story is not uncommon. If I go back to the days I worked in rehab and pulled out the guys that are still sober today or still straight today, very, very, very small amount of people. I would say 80 to 90% of them have relapsed.
Wow.
So with us, it's the other way around. So Katie's story is amazing, but it's not uncommon.
No.
It's person after person after person after person. And if anyone's watching this and you've been on it for a while, like Katie was saying, everyone's different. It takes a bit of time for some people. It takes a bit longer for other people. But if you just stick with the medication, it does work. I have never, ever, ever seen anything like it in my life, in that field of things.
Yeah.
And there's been newspaper reports in New York Times, I think it was recently. There's been Claudia's been on American TV chat programs.
Yeah.
But we just need as much here in the UK. If anyone has any access to anything where we can promote it a bit more, we would love to hear about it. Same in America. If there's anyone that has access to any media, anything that's positive that we can promote the whole process to, and Claudia will do it as well. Katie will do it. I know Karen will jump at the chance to do it as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's us. Unfortunately, we could talk about this all night as usual.
Yeah. It's been great chatting with you as always.
And if anyone's got any questions, like we said, it's if you're in the States, embodydaily.com is Katie's organization. So if you've got any questions at all, or if you need to reach out about Sinclair Method to anyone, or if you've got questions, get in touch with Katie. If you're here in the UK, we were just talking yesterday about actually changing our name, Alcohol Recovery Scotland, because everyone thinks we just work in Scotland, but we will work obviously through the UK and in parts of Europe, as well. We'd rather stick to the UK, but we can do bits and pieces. So any questions from anyone, give us a shout. So
thanks everyone for being here.
It's still early in the morning for Kaylee, but I've had a long day.
Whatever you want to call me is fine.
Oh, it's Katie. Sorry, Katie. So, okay. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Any final wisdom, or
I don't think I've got anything else. Yeah. Thanks again to everyone in the chat. Great conversation, great dialogue. Thanks for being here.
Never forget to take your pill.
Yeah. The golden rule.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're here every Wednesday, the first Wednesday of every month, unless we're on holiday or got some other commitments. And we'll speak to everyone soon. Okay. Bye. We'll speak to you soon. Bye.